Hi guys, Aiden here. Sorry, a quick note, sorry that I haven't put out a video recently. I actually came down with a really terrible case of pneumonia. Luckily no COVID, but it took me out for a little while. So anyway, I'm back, and I wanted to dedicate this video to a little bit about how to convert endgames. And basically, this video should be more helpful to beginning players, but a lot of games in chess come down to pawn endgames. You know, who's going to make a queen first, and then checkmate with that queen. So just sort of going to pay lip service to how to quickly checkmate with just a king and a queen and a king and a rook versus a king. So for example, let's say we've got a king and a queen on the board for white and just a king on the board for black. How do we go about finishing off this position? Well, the way I like to think of it is that we want to make the life of our enemy king smaller. So a lot of beginners fall into this problem of thinking that they should be attacking the king. So like one attacking move would be, let's say, queen h3, but in fact it doesn't really do much for our cause. The king just moves away. Let's say we keep attacking the king just moves. If we keep on checking the king and putting it in danger, we're actually just giving the king more places to go, right? So anyway, what I want to show is that, see, let's say after this move, now instead let's go to a good plan. So instead of actually attacking the king and trying to force it somewhere, let's notice that the queen right now actually guards, in a sense, sort of like a box, a rectangle, right, that the king can never get out of, can never cross this path, because the queen is guarding this rank and this file. So how could we make that smaller? Well, one good move would be queen f6. Now this box is just a little bit smaller. So let's say the king goes here, we bring our king in to keep cutting off more and more squares. King goes back. Let's take our queen here, and now we're pushing the king to the edge of the board. Suddenly the king is on the end of the board. We'll bring our queen here, for example. Now the king is stuck forever on this line, right? So the king's only move, in fact, is here, and we can just bring our king to follow the enemy king. And now eventually this will be checkmate, right? It's going to end up being checkmate on one of these squares. It's simple with the queen. With the rook, it can be a little more tricky, just because the king can stay in the center for longer, but it's really the same concept. So I'm just gonna go through it quickly. So let's say the rook here, right? We're making this box. The king's gonna try to stay in the center as much as it can. We're gonna stop it there. See, we'll make the king's box smaller again. But now the king is going to stay. Again, we can make the box smaller. Let's say the king goes here. And eventually we're going to have to bring our king into this mess. So now when the king goes here, we can't really, there's no move to make this smaller, right? So we're going to have to take a small step and just bring our king. So let's say the king goes here. We can't go here for the fact that the king will take our rook, right? But we can do something like this and push the king further to the edge. So let's say the king doesn't want to go to the edge of the board. That would be detrimental to him. So he goes here. We bring our rook to cut it off even more. King goes here. We've got to keep our rook safe. Now when the rook moves, we can box it in even more. And now the king's going to get forced to the edge of the board. So we can, let's say, bring our king here. The king comes back out. And again, the king's going to have to go to the edge of the board. So let's say it goes here. We can bring our rook here. And the king is just stuck in these two squares, right? And eventually, we've got checkmate. Checkmates can rise in various different patterns, obviously, but it's really important to be able to know how to checkmate with just a king and a queen and just a king and a rook. A king and two bishops is important as well. A king and a bishop and a knight also is checkmate, but those positions are a little bit trickier, and I suggest you learn them at a little bit of a higher level. So something that I wanted to talk about in this video is this concept called zugzwang. So zugzwang is the concept that if it's your move and you have no moves that are beneficial to your position, in fact every move that you can make would be detrimental. So I'm going to try to give an example of that. So for example, in this position it looks like both kings are going to be racing to try to go and snag these pawns and win the game by taking the pawn and then queening the pawn and checkmating the way we just saw, right? But let's say white naturally does this. Black comes here, king comes in here to attack the pawn, and actually after king c4, white is now losing. White is now in what's called zugzwang. Basically all of our potential moves are detrimental to our position, right? And this is actually a case of what we'd call mutual zugzwang. If it were black's move, black would be losing, but since it's white's move, white's losing. So mutual zugzwang is when whoever's move it is, they're either losing or drawing depending on the situation. So for example, this is still a drawn position, it's just that both players should be a little trickier here, right? When white played here, they made a fatal mistake. White should do something like this, and black should also be careful not to fall into the same mistake, right? If black goes king c4, then we just go king e5, and it's the same position except for it's black to move, right? And no matter where black goes, let's say here, then we take the pawn and we're gonna end up winning the game. But so this position right here is very important to remember, that when you see this construction, whoever's move it is actually the losing side of the game. Now, for example, this is another really important concept to understand. Let's say this position we have here. A simple beginner might just think, okay, well, I've got the extra pawn, it's going to become a queen, and the game's going to be over. But in fact, this is a position of zugzwang. No matter what white does, they cannot make their position more. They can't make progress with their position, right? Let's say white comes in here to try to get the pawn queened. Black just moves here, right? And if we do try to make progress, all black has to do is stay in front of the pawn, and for example, any move we make is going to draw the game, right? If we do any move that doesn't keep the pawn alive, then it's just game over this way. And if we keep the pawn alive, this is a stalemate. Black has no moves to make, if that makes sense. Now, this is a position not of mutual zugzwang. If it was black's move, black would still be able to draw this game by staying in front of the pawn here. So we can make a couple moves, for example, to make it look like it was black's move there, right? So here it's the same position except for it's black's move. Let's say black goes here. Maybe white tries something like this to try to infiltrate this way, but no, it's the same thing, right? White cannot make progress, and we have the same position. If white retreats, black can just stay in front of the pawn, and there's nothing that white can actually do about this. If white moves in, then black should be very careful. Obviously this would be a huge mistake. Suddenly white does take over these two squares and queens the pawn, but black should continue by just staying in front of the king and the pawn, and again, there's no way to queen this pawn. Now this is a whole different situation if the king is in front of the pawn. Right, in this situation, white can actually make progress here because we have that extra tempo. So let's say black tries to just stay in front of the pawn, right? We could make mistakes by, let's say here, right here. And now if white goes here, black has this extra move white's king is no longer on this square covering all the spots. Black has to go here, and now white can take over the square and win the game. So when you're transitioning from the end of the game in king and pawn endgames, especially when you're like a pawn up, definitely remember that it's really important to try to achieve this position where your king is in front of the pawn, which will lead to actually a winning endgame, as opposed to a drawn or potentially even losing one, where you can get tricked. And also, if you're on the black side of things, also that, black, or just the position with down a pawn, you want to remember to try to aim for positions where you're forcing your opponent to trade into these drawn or losing positions. So for one little last puzzle that I'll show, just to kind of clarify how important the initiative in chess is, the initiative in terms of like queening and being the first side to get a pawn to the end of the board. Let's say we have a position like this. It might look drawn to the naked eye, but this is actually a winning position for white if it's white to move. And that's because white actually can get one of these pawns through to the end of the board before black can get a queen. I'll leave you guys to take a second, pause the video if you want to try to analyze it and figure it out yourself. But okay, I'll go ahead. So the winning move is actually b6 here. Now, let's say c takes b6. This is where it gets tricky, right? We have to come up with a move that combines a dual threat, and actually a6 wins the game. Now, as you can see, we're threatening to both take this pawn and make a queen, and we're threatening to, that would be if black takes our pawn, and if black takes this pawn on a6, we're threatening to just queen a pawn this way, right? So it might look very mild or tame on the surface, but this is actually a one position for white. So memorizing at least these three king and pawn endgames, I think, is a really good sort of wheelhouse for starting to get better at playing your endgames, right? So obviously too, if black just sidesteps us, then we're just gonna make a queen like this, right? And if instead of c takes b6, a takes b6, then we're just doing the same thing geometrically on the other side, right? If we go here, now if b takes a, then c takes b, and we're going to make a queen and win. And if they take our pawn here, if they take our pawn here, then we have a clear path to victory, right? Okay, guys, that was just a little endgame video. Hope that everything's okay with you guys in these strange COVID times. Please give comments or email me. I think my email is in the description of the channel. But yeah, I'd love to hear feedback from you guys, and maybe my next video will be tailored to something that I hear from you. Awesome. Have a good one.